We serve in-house legal teams. We serve law firms, a lot of them, from boutiques to AmLaw 200. But what they all have in common is that they are drafting and negotiating complex contracts. The transactional kind of work, legal work, is what we support specifically. So typically you'd find our users within M&A teams, real estate teams, tax legal teams, and so forth. And the challenge that or at least the challenges that we solve for them is twofold. First of all, when drafting and negotiating these type of agreements, they tend to work with things they've written in the past, precedents, and looking for those precedents is a big part of their day-to-day, opening up a lot of folders, opening up a lot of contracts, looking for that one thing they have once written. And of course, with their colleagues asking, have you ever done something like this? Or vice versa, right? That's on an individual level, the challenge that we solve for our customers. On an organizational level, moreover, an opportunity really. These legal teams, these law firms, they sit on a pile of data, and they sit on a lot of contracts, often, from years and years and years. Most of the time, very unstructured, right? But, a lot of leading firms, they realize that there's so much value in there, right? I mean, they're often thinking of how can we still instill some sort of sharing mindset within the organization? How can we make sure, like, what's in the mind of our senior partner, let's call her Rebecca, how can we make sure that, Jenny, who just started yesterday, can tap into that collective knowledge? And so leading law firms realize that sharing mindset is definitely a cultural mindset. It's definitely something that you need to get your people to think of, but it's also something that tech can really enable. Tech can really give leverage to that data for your talent, but also for your clients. And that's what we focus on a daily basis. And thinking of solving that problem, I kind of want to take you on a quick path here of how we think about solving this problem. And so first of all, let's imagine that you're an M&A professional and you want to draft something. You can ask a large language model or a GPT to write you a certain clause, let's say liability clause. It will generate you something, but quickly you'll find you can't really use it, or you need to adjust a lot. And then you could assume, like, okay, what if we could attach a large language model to our DMS, to our database? It would have that tone of voice of the organization. It would, sound like something we would write, or it would read like something we would write. And that's probably true. But within the use case of transactional legal work, you'll be left quite insecure in the sense of, like, is this something that we typically write within this contract type? Or is this something that my senior partner would approve of in this kind of industry specific domain? And so you'll always be missing contextuality within that use case. And that's really what we focus on a daily basis. And how we do that is simple. And when we started with Henchman, two things were very clear to us. First of all, legal professionals are super busy people. And secondly, they can't really be bothered with tech in a way, right? They're not the most tech savvy audience out there. Let's be frank, let's be honest. So we were like, okay, whatever we're going to build has to be something that is plug and play. It has to be something with a very short time to value. And it should not be something that requires our customers to invest a lot of energy prior to getting value out of it, right? And so how we solve that is in 3 steps. So first of all, we connect to the document management system of our customers. This can be iManage, NetDocuments, SharePoint, OpenText, doesn't matter. There's no preparation required from our customers in advance of connecting, right? So it can be a messy database, it can be a super tidy database, it doesn't matter. And then secondly, we will then recognize what are contracts and what are agreements and what are not. And then we will isolate all clauses and definitions from those contracts. And so per customer, we easily process a couple of million of clauses and definitions of their own clauses and definitions. What we take into account is the metadata associated to those clauses from those contracts. We also respect the user permissions, and we mirror the user permissions from the DMS, meaning that if there's Chinese wall instilled within the DMS, those will be also mirrored within Henchman. And we even create metadata in the process. And then, of course, for the end user, they can then all of a sudden access all of those millions of clauses and definitions from the firm within Microsoft Outlook and Word, of course. So we really want to be where our users and where our customers are. And so the way we look at that, if you think of Google, Google, if you do a search query, you get a million hits. But of course, somehow those top 10 are very relevant to your context. Those are exactly the ones that you need. So in a way, Google is assuming a lot of things. And so we do no different. So we look at the context of what you're working in. Let's imagine that you get something from the counterparty. Henchman will recognize the contract type you're working in. Henchman will also recognize the governing law that's stipulated within the contract. We know what team you're working in also as well. And there's so much more other metadata that we take into account. And we will match that to the context of your database. And so we will surface clauses and definitions from similar contract types, from similar governing law, and from your colleagues, let's say, and much more metadata that's involved, so that you, and of course involving large language models in that process as well, so that your search experience is super personalized. And I think this is a very clean example where, let's say you're working in a loan agreement and you search for a closing clause, you will get different results as if you were in a share purchase agreement, to give you a very concrete example. So that's really what we're constantly evolving towards as a piece of technology. And of course, I want to show you guys a quick demo. So here we are, Microsoft Word. I think you all know this very well. This is a share purchase agreement. This is Henchman. I can open this up. I can make this bigger. I can put this in a second screen. And let's imagine, for the sake of the demo, that we got the share purchase agreement from the counterparty. And what you see here on the right, immediately, this is something we released 2 weeks ago, actually. It's what we now coin as our clause widget. And so Henchman recognizes where my cursor is. And Henchman proactively tells me, I notice that you're working in a restrictive covenants clause of the type of mergers and acquisitions. And I already can tell you that this language is quite common within your database, right? This is, of course, indicative. It's not absolute. It's, of course, telling you this is quite market within the firm. If it would be very low, it would be potentially an indication that we've never seen it, so act cautiously. And then in order to unlock that collective knowledge, these are the first steps that we're taking there. And we're going to do much more exciting stuff in the future, but we're giving you an idea of who within your organization has actually drafted that restrictive type of covenants clause within the organization, within those types of contracts. And you can then start to browse your collective knowledge within the other organization. But of course, let's go back to the core. Let's imagine I want to find non-solicitation clause from my database. Here I type non-solicitation. This is not based on taxonomy. This is based on what is on your database, right? You click here and you get 14 hits, which is low. This is a demo environment. With our customers, they can easily get like a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand hits, depending on the size of the database and, of course, the firm. What I'm showing you now is an exact search. I will show you in a minute a semantic, or what we call sometimes a similar search. I open this up, and what you see is that the results are ranked based on relevance. As I mentioned before, Henchman is taking into account the contract type, as well as the governing law, as well as many other data points. And so it's surfacing similar, or at least clauses from similar contract types and so forth. You could also rank on commonality, right? Here you see that this is quite common in terms of language, and this is lying more towards the outliers, for instance, or however, it's not entirely an outlier. You can apply filters. Contract has the words, contract type. This can also be based, you can kind of configure these filters based on certain fields that you have within your DMS. We could just configure them for a specific client. So you could say, well, contract type, we then cluster those, mergers and acquisition, boom, and there you go. When you open up one of the clauses, you can quickly show the metadata associated to the contract. You can open a contract for more context. You will be redirected to iManage or Net Documents in that case. And of course, you could toggle through those results. let's imagine that you don't find it in your database. You want to or you want to benchmark against, let's say, public precedents in a way. Well, we have a partnership with Law Insider where you can quickly kind of toggle between results from my database or, for instance, Law Insider's database, where you can quickly then see how that compares. The next example and last example I want to show you guys, because there's so much more, is let's imagine that I have a non-competition clause here. And I want to quickly get an idea of, what else have we done like this within the firm? So you can just take that clause and you can drop it like it's hot here in Henchman, and you will automatically get similar clauses from your DMS, right? And so instantly you can say, well, let's redline compare against what we have in our database. So you can quickly see how that differs. But of course, I don't need to tell you, sometimes the words can look entirely different, but the meaning can be quite similar. So we've introduced a table view where you could easily kind of compare what you have on your document and how that compares to the search results within your database. So you can toggle between that. You can see, oh, how does that differ? You go back to the red line. Let's imagine that you still want to edit a couple of elements within the clause. Let's imagine that on the left, it's now seller, but let's say I want to pluralize it. You could just then select seller, do smart replace, make it sellers, boom. And then Henchman will pluralize that entire clause, adjust the grammar if needed, and then you can just go and move forward, or you could just cancel the selection. And you could even insert that clause with track changes if you wanted to, taking into account the formatting of the document. Of course, there's much more that I can show you guys, but this is, I would say the core of Henchman, how people love to use Henchman today. And of course, if you want to see a demo, you can definitely contact us at info@henchman. But one thing I want to show you, and I'm going to go back to the demo, to the slides, is where we're taking this. Like, what are we building moving forward? So the way that we look at AI copilots, the Harveys, the Spellbooks, the Microsoft copilots, there's plenty of AI copilots out there, and they're all very useful because we share a lot of mutual customers. I mean, if you think of it, they're quite reactive in nature. You ask it something, they give you something back. They're connected to a data set. They're conscious of that data set, but they're not super factual. So they're very good at providing you with the next best words. They're very good at providing you with that first draft, with some inspiration. What at Henchman, we're really obsessed because we're obsessed with that contextuality. We're that intelligent layer on top of your DMS. We understand the DMS better than anyone. And so we want to move beyond that. So we're creating the chief of staff for all legal professionals, where a chief of staff is very data-driven, very strategic to the legal profession, and approaches you when he or she deems it necessary in certain cases. So rather than providing the next best words, Henchman is all about creating those, or at least providing those next best options to our customers so that they can then decide what to do with that information. And so that is really where we're going. And of course, we're building the chief of staff for associates and juniors, and we're building a chief of staff for seniors, focused more on reviewing and benchmarking, chief of staff for knowledge managers. Yeah, we're very excited about what's coming.
So Jorn, I know you made a very exciting announcement yesterday around some of the AI co-piloty things. Would you mind sharing that with our attendees today?
Happy to. Yeah, it's fresh off the press, right? And so, yeah, we're partnering with Microsoft because, yeah, Microsoft Copilot is a brilliant tool, but it's quite wide in terms of range that it serves, right? It's not just made for legal. And in the case of legal, especially the use case that we serve, the transactional kind, when you use Copilot, of course, it could be attached to your SharePoint instance. But if you would say, like, give me the most common clause under New York law, let's say, of liability that we have within the firm, it would generate you something. As we know GPT to do, it's going to be credible, and it's going to give you a source from your database, but it's not always correct, right? It's not something you could trust within your interactions with your clients. And so what we've done together with Microsoft is we built a plugin where Henchman actually acts as a source for Microsoft Copilot. So if you would, ask it a question like, hey, give me the most common clause of my colleagues in this kind of governing law, well, then Henchman first would kind of surface those clauses, and then Copilot would do something with it. So the result or the impact of Microsoft Copilot is going to be much more accurate